Welcome to the iSpace Wellbeing Expert Talk Series, bringing you advice, tips, and great conversation about mental health and well-being in young people. iSpace Wellbeing is a free of charge, multi-award-winning mental health and well-being solution for schools. Using a whole school, progressive and evidence-based approach, we make conversations about mental health and well-being flow naturally, both inside and outside of the classroom. Our fun, age-appropriate framework starts from 4 years old and covers all the key stages of a child's education. Schools choosing iSpace Wellbeing will not only give their teachers access to over 200 digital lessons, plans and other resources, but also free CPD-accredited training. Why not join the growing number of schools around the globe who are choosing iSpace Wellbeing for their students' mental health and well-being education? For more information, visit iSpaceWellbeing.com.
This is the iSpace Wellbeing Mental Health and Wellbeing Month of May series, because the month of May is about raising awareness around our mental health, and it's also the month of nature, where we should be encouraging everyone we know and ourselves to get outside in nature as well. And I am the founder of iSpace Wellbeing, which is the mental health and wellbeing free solutions through the provision of mental health and wellbeing resources and curriculums to schools. And I am delighted this evening to be joined by Hope Virgo, who I've done quite a few little things with in mental health through schools and through children's advisory board meetings, which has been wonderful. But Hope, you have an amazing bio, and you're an author and you're an international advocate for mental health and for people with eating disorders, supporting them and really driving the most important, I think, campaign at the moment called #DumpTheScales, which is to ensure that everyone who needs support and care gets the support and care that they need, and that they are not turned away from services due to an assessment related to their weight. It's really important that that is not part of the assessment. And you are doing amazing work for that, and have been doing so for some time now. And we at iSpace Wellbeing fully support you and your campaign. And you're also at the moment advising around calories being listed on menus and on foods and things like that, which again is a really, really important drive that you are pushing forward at the moment. So really, a round of applause for you, Hope, and all of the work that you are doing. And so I know that your bio has lots of other things on there, but I think that I'd like to really invite you in now to maybe tell everyone who's listening, and thank you everyone who is joining in at the moment, but perhaps you can tell everyone who's listening a little bit about your story and how we are here today having a conversation around our mental health and well-being.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on this evening. It's lovely to connect like this. So I was just trying to think where to really start with everything. I feel like you've just given such a lovely introduction. So thank you for that. So yeah, I have lived experience of anorexia. So I developed it when I was about 12, 13 years old. And it was basically a coping mechanism to life. So it gave me a real sense of purpose, this real kind of value. It numbed a lot of emotion. It gave me this real sense of control. My eating disorder was not caused by bad body image, but the body image was something that definitely became kind of quite intrinsically kind of wrapped up in the whole kind of, I guess, my whole experience of being in recovery, but also when I began to develop it as well. So I ended up hiding it actually from everyone around me for about 4 years. That's something that's really common with eating disorders. People become very, very secretive. They get quite nervous when people try and kind of interfere. But throughout that 4-year period, whilst I would say at the start, it made me feel really, really good, towards the end of that 4-year period, it was actually making life feel really, really difficult in places. I ended up being referred to my GP, and going to the Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services, so CAMS. Spent about 6 months as an outpatient, and then eventually was admitted to treatment, where I lived in a hospital for about a year. And I do want to emphasize, I think, so I went into treatment kind of 12, 13 years ago. And 12, 13 years ago, there was not this ridiculously long wait. There was not this ridiculous kind of BMI criteria that was in place. And I think that's really, I do think that's a really important thing to emphasize, because I don't want people to kind of be looking at my story and thinking they don't deserve to get well, they don't deserve to recover, because they've never had that experience in a hospital. But I do believe that every single person deserves to recover, regardless of if they've been diagnosed with a full-blown eating disorder. I think all kind of disordered eating is unhealthy, and is something that needs to be tackled with that individual. But yeah, like I said, I spent a year in treatment, so learning a lot about my emotions, learning a lot about kind of communication, learning to eat. It was very structured, which I really, really needed at that point. And I think for me, it was just having that space to feel really, really heard, and to learn to kind of start really, yeah, I guess understanding what I needed emotionally and how I could get that. I am in an ongoing state of recovery. So I've been now in recovery for the last 12 years, I guess, since I kind of entered treatment. I haven't gone back into treatment kind of properly since I came out of hospital. I tried back in 2016, but that was when I wasn't able to get treatment, because I didn't fit into kind of like a neat BMI criteria. And at that point, I was just so upset about the whole thing. I felt like this completely fake kind of anorexic person. I felt like I had to really prove myself. Luckily, I kind of turned it around on my own without any additional support. And I now work closely with a dietitian to, I think for me, kind of make that final step in my recovery. I know statistically that only 50% of people recover from an eating disorder, 30% of people live with it forever, and 20% remain chronically unwell. And I definitely have been in that 30% for far too long, and have made so many mistakes in my recovery. But I think kind of having a bit of a reassessment about things, probably before Christmas, within kind of like a peer support setting, I realized that actually I didn't want to let this control me anymore. So I'm really working hard at the moment to get to that space where I am fully recovered.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Hope. And I have your book, your first book, and it is Stand Tall, Little Girl, and I absolutely love it. I bought a copy for my daughter as well, so there's two copies in our house, and I quite often find myself going back to it as well. Especially right because I work in schools, and I work with young people who have disordered eating, and I find this book really, really helpful. And one of the things that I really like in this book, that you describe your best friend anorexia. Can you tell people listening why you gave anorexia that name, your best friend?
Yeah. So for some people with eating disorders, you do hear kind of like a literal voice in your head. For other people, you don't. So it's obviously very, very unique to the person. But definitely for me, when I first developed an eating disorder, it was like this best friend with me all the time. It was there in the evenings when I was listening to my family all arguing. I was sexually abused, and would often have like flashbacks and be quite triggered by things. And if I felt any kind of emotion towards any of that sort of stuff, I would immediately kind of find that kind of best friend talking to me about food and calories and exercise. And it just took me out of the reality of actually what was kind of really happening around me. And it really served a purpose. And I think that's the really scary thing with eating disorders, is they serve a purpose. They give you this comfort, this security blanket. And it's that you really, really long for a lot of the time. And I know there's been moments in kind of my whole life where I've kind of wanted to go back to that space. And even now, in all honesty, like I've got like some personal stuff going on at the moment. And occasionally when I feel really triggered in it, I feel like, oh, if I just went back to that comfort momentarily, things would feel amazing. And now I'm in a space, obviously, that I would never want to go back to that. And I'm able to really push back on it straight away. But it's taken me a kind of a substantial amount of time, I think, to get to that space. But I definitely think, like, for me, kind of personifying it in that sense has helped me to kind of distance myself from it a lot more. And like remove it from part of my identity, and I no longer let that part of me define me. Like it's not who I am. Yes, I've had an eating disorder, and yes, it was my best friend, but now it is just something that happened, and it's something that I now feel very much able to push away and challenge when I get into that state. And I think it points for me definitely what's helped, and for people who maybe are listening who are struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating or an unhealthy relationship with exercise. I think for me, like writing to the eating disorder, like calling it out, like having conversations with it. It sounds ridiculous, but actually just
Very
getting
good. Very good tip.
be really helpful.
Absolutely, very good tip. I completely with you there, and I also think that I just wonder what your experience was when, because obviously in the role that I'm within, I'm trying to support and help young people with disordered eating, and sometimes I'm the the person who perhaps may spot it and may call it out, and try to help and support that young person in getting the right care that they need. But I wonder from your experience when you were in that space with your best friend anorexia, did the anorexia get in the way of people being able to help you? Did that best friend talk to you in a way of pushing those people back who were perhaps coming in and trying to call it out?
Yeah, it definitely did. And if I listened to others, it would feel really, really guilty afterwards. So if I did what someone else wanted, I'd be sitting with a lot of that guilt, a lot of that discomfort. And I think in so many cases, it can really get in the way of friendships. It can get in the way of relationships with people that you love, but also with kind of parents and siblings as well. And I know there were points when I was, when I was unwell and I was so in the grips of it that I would often kind of be shouting at my parents, or I remember my younger brother would often sit with me at breakfast and try and be getting me to have something. And I'd be taking everything out on him.
Yeah.
And you don't really realize you're doing it at the time because you don't think people understand you. And I remember even when I went in kind of my first kind of GP appointment about it, I remember sitting there and thinking like no one gets it. Like no one really understands what is actually going on. And that for me was something that just put such a blockade kind of up to everyone around me. And I'm quite a closed kind of protective person, which is probably ironic because I spend my life talking about mental health and my experience and things like that. But I do find it hard to be really honest with people. And I think the anorexia definitely put that block kind of even higher the more people kind of maybe challenged me and called me out on stuff when I was growing up.
Yeah, I think this is really, really helpful because the experiences I'm having at the moment are within peer groups, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about this in a second about the impact of the pandemic on young people and their relationship with eating. But the little peer groups that I'm working with at the moment, they went on the return to school after the pandemic. There was an increase in people struggling with their eating, and some of their friends spotted it and they're trying to offer support, but they're getting the pushback, and they're getting the experience that you just described with your brother around the breakfast table, and they're finding it really hard to understand. Is there anything you could say to those people who are experiencing their friends going through that? They've tried to help and be that supportive friend, but they're getting the pushback, and of course they don't understand it very well.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really difficult. And I totally get that. Like it is really hard. And I think for me, when people started to interfere a lot of the time, it felt like someone was trying to fix me and trying to get in the way of something. And actually, as someone who's in recovery, and even at the time, like I've never ever wanted to be fixed. I don't want sympathy. I wanted someone to just be there, kind of walking alongside me and offering me that support, like giving me that space to talk about things. I think practically, like I am a firm believer in direct questions. So I always think the first thing to do is to call out those behaviors and have that direct conversation. I think 90% of the time, the person will do exactly what we've talked about. They will shut you down. They'll be like, everything's fine, life's fine. Like, please don't worry, like, I'm okay. And in those situations, it's about going back to them a couple of weeks later, like saying, like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? How are you feeling? And I think we always have to remember that eating disorders are not about food, they're not about weight, they're not about the body image, they're because something else is going on and something else isn't right. So we need to be kind of giving them that space to really ask, and giving them that space to feel really heard. And I think, yes, we have seen this huge increase over the last year. And I think, like, looking at the statistics right now, it's absolutely terrifying how many people are struggling, and the number of people who are needing that.
That's it. We're back.
Perfect.
We're back.
Okay, awesome. Fab, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but hopefully everybody heard what you were saying. I wonder if anybody who is listening, if they lost sound, if they could let us know. But I think we were just moving into the impact of the pandemic, Hope, and what that is. And we were also talking about, the eating disorders. It's not just all about food and about weight. It's multifaceted. There's so many different reasons behind why this happens. And sometimes I love the iceberg analogy, that you can use it for so many different things, but we see a behavior and that's the tip. But actually there's so much more that's going on underneath that we are not seeing. And I think that's maybe what you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's right. And I can see, I think, someone's mentioned I did drop out.
Okay.
Which is so, anyway, it doesn't matter. I was saying that I think when we are having those direct conversations with our friends or our family members and calling people out on stuff, they will kind of shut you down and not want to talk about it. And in those situations, it is about going back and talking about it. But I think particularly with the pandemic, it's like not making an assumption that things have got difficult because of the pandemic. They might have had stuff that was going on kind of for much longer before that. And the other thing that I wanted to emphasize, which I'm not sure if people heard as well, was as kind of lockdown eases a little bit and we kind of go back to some sense of normality, if you've got friends that are struggling with food, or are in recovery, or maybe are finding things slightly harder at the moment, it's like, be really mindful of the conversations we're having. Like, let's not talk about dieting and our bodies and how much we lose and all of that. And then again, within that, like, actually booking activities that don't always happen around food. I know for me, like, I've got so comfortable just having kind of food with certain people over the last year. And normally I'm totally fine with eating in front of anyone and last minute plans and restaurants. But actually with the pandemic, I'm having to go back to kind of a little bit, like a little bit of a start around it, and actually finding those safe spaces to do that again. And I think that's okay. It's about doing it in that safe space and that safe environment. And I think finding those people and surrounding yourself with people who really champion you within that and allow yourself to. For me, I'm really lucky that I've found people that I can do that with. But I think, again, it's one of the things that's helped is actually having that space to vent and not be kind of fixed all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And just listening from what you're saying there, like what kind of advice could you give? Because schools, lunchtime is such a public display of, picking and choosing and sitting and eating with other people. And it's very hard to navigate that if you're struggling. Is there any advice that you can give to people who are, having to sit and eat and have lunch at school?
The first thing is, I think, is to try and do what works for you and own that. So if you're someone who maybe needs to bring in a packed lunch, or you find it easier to sit with a member of staff, or for a parent to maybe sit in the car and have that with it, like, first, and be okay doing that. The other thing I think is really important is to try and find those distractions around meal times. So realizing that, yes, it might be a time of heightened anxiety. So if you can, and you've got a school menu to look at the menu beforehand, work out what a portion looks like on that plate, and focus on yourself during that meal time, and then giving yourself space after the meal time to have that distraction. I think the other thing that might help, which for me has been really important actually, is this realization that when I have a really challenging meal, I bloat like so much and I get so uncomfortable. And sometimes I have to like really sit with those feelings and really start to unpack it. And I think if you're able to identify that, then you can start to get to a space where you can predict what the eating disorder is going to tell you and how it's going to make you feel. And the more we unpack that and process it, the more we can move into that safer space. And I think so much of it with the food is, it's hard because we eating disorders are not a choice. We're not choosing to get unwell, but every single day we have to keep choosing to keep eating, to keep pushing forward with it, to keep doing all of this stuff. And I think, again, that's where it makes it slightly harder. So maybe having someone that you can text after a mealtime saying, yep, I've done it, I feel really guilty. Yep, I've done it, I feel like this. And I think, again, having those people that you can celebrate those wins with. I have probably never had anyone that I can celebrate those wins with really until recently. And having that space now where I am able to do that, it helps to alleviate some of that guilt. But it also just is that space where you're like, actually, people are championing my recovery. People are at that space with it. And I do think having those people can be really, really helpful too.
Absolutely. I think that is so important for young people. And this is why I think that when some young people that I was speaking to, when they went back to school after the pandemic, one of the things that some schools did was take their mobile phones away. And despite the fact that those mobile phones and technology was what actually got them through the pandemic and was almost a security net for them as well. And so for those schools that you can't have your phone with you, would journaling be helpful if they were to write it down, if they felt that guilt afterwards, if they were to write it down in something, would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's again, it's unpacking what that looked like, and maybe writing down your emotions. Like, I feel angry at this, I feel frustrated at this, I feel annoyed because I've had to have something, and really kind of getting to the bottom of that and being okay with having those feelings.
Yeah.
I do think as well, like maybe it would be then worth, in those schools where they haven't got phones in place, where someone can use, actually working out where that person can have a check-in in the afternoon
Yes.
day, because quite often if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, you might spend a lot of the afternoon kind of ruminating over what you've had.
Yes.
Do I have an extra snack? Did I have too much? What do I do for dinner that evening? And I do think that in some cases it might be kind of thinking, actually, what can we do for that young person? Maybe they get a quick phone call with someone who's supporting them to be like, actually, I had this for lunch, is that okay, is that enough? And
Yes.
I know that's the kind of thing that would have really, really helped as well.
Yeah, yes, I totally agree. And sometimes, as you said at the beginning, it can be quite secretive to start with. And maybe these young people that you know, they need to try and think of a person that they trust at school that they could go and talk to, so that they can have these conversations with and set up these little plans, a little plan of how the day is going to go and how they can seek that support and help when they need it throughout the day. And sometimes maybe doing that with a parent initially to start with, or somebody at home that you feel is supportive and helpful, and going and approaching the school to ask who that go-to person might be, and have that little setup so that it makes it a safer place for you to be in. And what about seeking that outside support, Hope? Because we talked about how, you know, CAMS in the beginning, when they first set up, the referrals weren't as great as they are today, and so access was quicker. But and you talked about going to your GP as well. What is the first route you think that we should be signposting parents and children to, or even teachers to support and seek help for these young people?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is, as soon as you start noticing any of these behaviors creeping in, or you notice someone looking quite distracted at a mealtime or looking quite distant and starting to withdraw, that is for me when we have to kind of get in there and really kind of start having a conversation around it. I'm a firm believer in early intervention.
Yes.
Leave it, the harder it will be for that person, I think, to get out of those patterns of ingrained behaviors in their head. And the longer we leave it as well, the more normal those behaviors will become for that person. So again, it kind of adds another challenge into it. And that isn't me saying that obviously people who have had an eating disorder for longer, it's harder for them. It's very, very different. But early intervention is the way forward with all of this sort of stuff. I think the first step is to always go to your GP. Yes, GPs are so overwhelmed. There are no services. There's a huge lack of funding available at the moment. But I think going to your GP and starting to have a conversation around it is important. When you go to your GP, make sure that you have that safe space around the appointment. For me, I would always go and be like, I feel like this. I felt like this for a while, I've struggled with this for a while, this is what I think I need, and going in that really kind of matter of fact way. That is what works for me. Some people will probably go in much more emotionally or have a kind of, a different way of doing it, but for me that's always helped to kind of iron it out. I think once you've done that, again, you need to have that safe space to offload afterwards, remembering that quite often the GP will say there's no services available, your BMI is not low enough, you're not underweight, whatever it might be. And that can be really, really triggering for someone with an eating disorder. And in those, again, you've got to have that space to then offload onto someone else. I think schools where there's a school nurse or a school counsellor, again, creating that space where someone can come and check in, having that space to maybe talk through a bit of a structure around food, having some sort of routine in place. And I think always reminding the individual that they're not okay, even if they're eating, that they might still be struggling, even if they look physically well. And giving them, again, those reminders on that kind of day-to-day basis, I think, can help them to really start to step forward within it. There are some fantastic organisations out there who can, again, offer that additional support. My kind of go-tos for places that I always refer to. So for slightly older children, kind of 16 to 25, there's the Mix, which is a fantastic place. Sources, Q&As, everything like that. For parents and carers, there's an organisation called Feast, which again has a lot of support out there as well. And then also, if you look at an app called the Hub of Hope, again, you can type your postcode in, you get a ton of resources, kind of face-to-face stuff, you get remote stuff, you get charity, you get private stuff as well. But I also think that in places, and if you feel like this might work for you, and I know it definitely I'm at a space in my recovery where it does work for me, there is also places that you can look online. So I work closely with a woman called Renee McGregor, who often posts a lot about kind of diet stuff, like kind of healthy eating, healthy behaviors, and again, kind of talks a lot about that relationship with our bodies as well. And me, I'm definitely in a space where I can look at that information and I believe what she's saying, and I can kind of factually kind of take it and agree with it. Other people probably won't be able to do that just yet, but I think looking at what is out there online, I think is really important.
Yeah, brilliant. And I love that you've mentioned the Mix. The Mix, we signpost in our curriculum, in the iSpace Wellbeing curriculum and our senior curriculum, #IWonder, we signpost young people to the Mix because we think they're an amazing resource out there for young people. And at the beginning, Hope, you mentioned about your experience and that the anorexia was almost like a coping mechanism. And let's think about some of the coping tools that you use now, because I see all the things that you do. I invited you to schools where I work, and I see the wonderful work that you do with young people and what you share in terms of how you have developed these really helpful coping mechanisms, such as your well-being jar and your almost like soothing boxes and little memory things. And so talk to us a little bit about that so that young people may find these things helpful. And I think in some ways when we have developed perhaps some unhelpful coping strategies, that we've almost like exercised a muscle over here and it seems to be working really well, and we don't want to move away from it. But then we've got these other helpful coping strategies that we almost need to practice so that we build up this muscle and let this one drift away almost in a way. And so these lovely little coping things that you use, if perhaps some people hear what you have to say about them this evening, maybe they can practice that and build that muscle stronger with helpful coping strategies.
Yeah, so I guess firstly the wellbeing jar, which I did at the start of January, which for me was and basically I just drew a jar on an A4 piece of paper. Some people might have really fancy jars, but I was like, I'm just gonna do it like this. And every single week I have things that I will do daily for my mental health. So for me, that's like going outside, sitting in the sunshine or the rain, whatever it might be, with a cup of tea. I also make sure that I have 3 meals and 3 snacks a day, so kind of quite structured around that sort of stuff, that routine, which is in the wellbeing jar. I have a week kind of long check-in thing as well in that, where I have to do at least 3 of those things a week. So for me, that is a peer support group that I go to. I go to church, try and go to church once a week. And again, kind of catching up with a friend, maybe in a distance walk or on the phone or something like that. And there's also on the wellbeing jar, like a bit of an emergency section, which for me is when I get into a kind of state of real heightened anxiety and a lot of fear. And my other half has authority at that point in the wellbeing jar to kind of be like, Hope, you need to go for a walk, you need to go and sit outside, have a glass of water, just take a moment to yourself. So that's all in the jar. Alongside that, I do a lot of journaling. I love writing, and I find it really, really helpful to kind of write down a lot of my thoughts and my feelings. Something that I'm spending a lot of time doing at the moment is doing a lot of this work around kind of parenting myself. So getting to a space where I'm able to kind of lie in bed in the evenings, and it probably sounds ridiculous to some people, but I struggle a lot with my family relationships, and I struggle a lot to feel good enough a lot of the time. And so I will lie in bed and I will tell myself all of those things that I wish that someone would say to me, and things that I guess, like, kind of parents would say to me in the past, and whatever. And I think getting to that space where I'm really able to champion myself has been a really, really helpful step forward. And I think as well, like as individuals, it's important within all of our wellbeing stuff to try and identify those times in the day where things might be slightly triggering or slightly harder, whether that's something to do with school, exams, whatever it might be. Or for me, it could be stress, it could be after a meal time, or I know when I've had a really difficult day, I have a tendency to kind of withdraw into my phone, and I would just sit on Instagram and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. And I'm not really looking at the content properly, but I'm just feeling really awful. And in those moments, for me, it's like, actually, do you know what? My phone is not helpful right now. I need to either put it in the bedroom and just have it away from me. Or what I've got into recently, actually, which I find really helpful, is kind of listening to podcasts. And either I watch them on YouTube or I listen to something and make notes, which again probably sounds really like I'm at school still, but it just helps to kind of, I guess it just helps to kind of quieten my mind a little bit in those moments when things feel really, really difficult. And I think the final thing for me that's been really helpful is looking at a lot of the fear around recovery. And I think realizing that a lot of the reasons that I probably have made a lot of mistakes in my recovery is I've always gone back to those unhealthy coping mechanisms when life's got really difficult, or I have a lot of fear around what my life will look like if I don't have these coping mechanisms, and kind of working out what that fear is, like what that really means. And I think just getting to a space where actually I've kind of identified what that fear looks like. And for me, it's wrapped up a lot in kind of abandonment and rejection, and not being good enough. And now I'm at a space, I think, because I've identified what that is, I'm then able to kind of start to step forward within it a lot more, and to really just kind of focus a lot more on myself and really prioritize it. And it's hard work, like, and I think as someone who is not very good at looking after themselves, it probably makes it a little bit more harder. But I think as individuals, it's identifying those things that really work for us. And I do think within all of that, obviously, like, self-care is really important. I'm not great at self-care, and I find it quite difficult, but I think it is working out what self-care looks like for each of us. It doesn't, for me, self-care isn't lying in the bath with a load of candles on or going out and getting my nails done. It's more of the journaling, it's more of the listening to podcasts. And I think, again, finding that time and that self-care stuff that does work for you and making that a priority. And I think as well, actually, probably within that self-care for me is probably even like this peer support that I go to, like that stuff, and remembering that I'm good enough and I deserve to go to that stuff, and I'm deserving to have the self-care as well. So just having those mantras to hand, I think, in those moments when it feels slightly harder. Sorry, that was an extremely long-winded answer.
Wonderful, really wonderful, because it's self-care and self-compassion. It's so important. And I think another thing that you've done as well, I think you mentioned mantras, but affirmations as well. I think you've got your little affirmation cards that you wrote to yourself when you were working towards your recovery as well, that can be really, really helpful. And that when you're talking about lying in bed at night, and it's that almost like that, talking to yourself like a best friend would, and bringing all of those positive comments that people would have said to you, and remember them, and savor them in a way as well, so that you get that feel good from reminding yourself of all of those positive things. And of course, you love your writing because you are a wonderful author, and you have a second book as well. And this second book was mostly about your recovery. And so please, everybody, do have a look out there for that as well. But Hope, thank you so, so much for all of your advice this evening, and sharing all of your experience with us. You've been wonderful with the children that I work with and that I've introduced you to through our ice-based schools. You sat in one of our ice-based lessons, which was about resilience, and I know that you loved the song that was played in that lesson, and that you put it on your playlist, which Buy Everything by Shakira. So if anyone out there hasn't heard that yet, get it on your playlist, because it will really help you to flip your mood into feeling really positive. And so thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing all of that with us. And is there anything else that you think at this moment in time, for our young people or our parents or our teachers, that we could just say to them now that could perhaps help them with the challenges that they're facing? Because it's not just young people and their relationship with food, but it's many, many other things as well that they're having to manage and deal with. And I wonder if there's anything that you could share with them now, just to kind of give them a little bit of positivity as we move towards the weekend.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's the reminder that you're not alone in what you're feeling, and life can feel really difficult, and life does suck at times. It's been a really hard year. The pandemic's been awful for so many people. It's affected all of us so, so differently. And I think for me now, it's like, actually, what can we do moving forward to really kind of do the best for our own mental health and for our general well-being as well? And I think whatever you're feeling this evening, like, that's okay. And it's like working out how you can move into a space, perhaps if you are struggling, where you're feeling a little bit better, where you're feeling like you're able to do stuff again. Don't rush that process. Like, take your time, unpack it. I think for me, one of my biggest mistakes was not unpacking a lot of the emotions that I went through and needed to. So giving yourself that space and allowing yourself to do that, whether it's through compassion, whether that's through therapy, whether that's through other additional support, but trying to work it out actually will be really, really helpful. And I think as well, like, realizing that yes, life is tough, like I said, but if you are struggling with a mental health issue, or you've got an eating disorder or an unhealthy relationship with food, like, don't wait until you're at this kind of so-called kind of crisis point. Like, we deserve to have support, whatever size, whatever shape we are. We deserve to have support, even if we've been feeling rubbish for maybe only a few days. And that's time to really, I think, let that sink in, and realizing that you can reach out for support, and you deserve to reach out for support, and that a total recovery from disordered eating is 100% possible, but you need to just allow yourself to start stepping forward within that. And I think not setting yourself probably these kind of ridiculous timeframes is important as well. I know for me, something that's always kind of probably got me a little bit stuck in places is when I've been like, right, in 6 months' time, I'm going to be off medication. 6 months' time, I'm going to be 100% well. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. But actually, that just puts that additional pressure on ourselves. And then if it doesn't work, we feel more guilty, all of that sort of stuff. So I think, again, just being very, very aware of that, and looking at the whole picture, and realizing that it's going to be up and down. It's going to be difficult. But on those harder days, it's about getting up. It's about just keeping going, sitting with that emotion, and just pushing forward within it.
Yeah, absolutely. And early intervention, as you say, so, so important, which is why I started the work that I do with ice-based wellbeing, and that mental health and wellbeing education for schools, teaching young people who and how to ask for help, giving them a language, giving them a set of tools, bringing a whole school approach into schools so that everybody shares this language, everybody knows how to support each other, and so that we can try and reassure people that when they are struggling, that they can come forward early and get that support and help that they need. So if there are any teachers or parents listening, do pop over to the iSpace Wellbeing website. The teachers' schools can register for free. They get free CPD accredited teacher training on how to implement this into their schools. So do pop over there, and do go and look at Hope's hashtag Dump the Scales petition. Please sign it, and support that very, very important campaign. And so thank you everyone who is listening, and thank you so much Hope Virgo, who is out there doing amazing, amazing work. And I hope to work with you again very soon, Hope, with the young people that I'm working with. So thank you so much, and have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you, Hope.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care.